Before you walked into the room had already changed, not because of something you said, not because of something you did, because everyone already knew who was about to walk through that door. The CEO, the founder, the president, the chairman, the person who controls capital, careers, opportunity, access, and sometimes someone's future. And whether you intended it or not, your title entered the room before you did. And that's where this conversation gets uncomfortable because the higher you rise in executive leadership, the more difficult it becomes to know whether you're experiencing people as they actually are or as they become around you. People may speak differently, they're going to disagree differently, they're going to take fewer risks, they're going to soften the bad news, nod when they actually disagree. And here's the dangerous part: you may never know that it's actually happening. From your chair, the meeting looked great. Everyone was engaged, everyone was aligned, nobody pushed back. Maybe you've built an extraordinary team, or maybe you just experienced the version of your team that your position taught them to become. After more than 25 years entrenched in predictable executive leadership, I've become fascinated by something we rarely discuss. Power doesn't only change the person who has it, power changes the behavior of everyone around the person who has it. And eventually, your greatest leadership challenge may no longer be gaining influence. It may be discovering what your influence is preventing you from seeing. So here's the question we're going to confront today. When you walk into the room, do people become more of themselves or less? And this is where today's conversations begin. There's something strange that happens as you rise in leadership. People start treating you differently. At first, you notice it, eventually, you don't. People interrupt you less. Your ideas receive more attention. Your questions carry more weight. Your reactions get studied more carefully. And something that feels remarkably like respect can quietly create something else: distance. And that's the invisible weight of the chair. A casual comment from the CEO can become a directive. A question can be interpreted as criticism. A preference can become a priority. You may forget what you said by lunchtime. Someone else may still be thinking about it 3 days later. Your words begin carrying consequences you may never personally experience. And I've watched CEOs walk into meetings and say, I don't want my opinion to influence anyone. But here's what I'm thinking. And guess what? That conversation has already changed. Everyone knows what the most powerful person in the room wants to be: the truth. This is why telling people I want everyone to speak freely isn't enough. Your executive team isn't simply listening to what you say, they're studying what disagreement costs them. And if challenging you creates curiosity, they'll do it again. If it creates tension, they'll become more selective how they engage. And if it creates embarrassment, they're eventually going to stop the engagement altogether. Not because they're weak, because they're intelligent. And eventually, you can make a mistake adaptation for alignment. And you may believe someone agrees with your strategy when they've simply decided disagreement isn't worth the political cost. You may believe someone isn't particularly opinionated when their peers experience a completely different person. And you may believe your executive team is comfortable with you, but comfort and honesty, they're not the same thing. People can respect you and still edit themselves around you. And that's the distortion. High performance leadership isn't measured by what you intended people to experience. It's measured by what they actually experience in your presence. So here's the question. What becomes harder to say when I enter the room? The answer probably isn't sitting inside you. It's sitting inside the people around you, because once you've earned the chair, you have to work even harder to prevent the chair from separating you from the truth. And here's where power becomes extremely dangerous. Not when people start lying to you, when they start editing the truth for you. The truth still reaches you, just softened, polished, reframed, delayed. We've all seen it. The risk becomes a challenge. The failure becomes a learning opportunity. The executive who's clearly struggling just needs more time. Eventually, you aren't receiving false information. You're receiving reality after it has been professionally edited for your consumption. And that should make every CEO uncomfortable, because you can make extraordinarily rational decisions based on extraordinarily incomplete reality. The spreadsheet is accurate, the board materials are complete, nobody lied, and somehow the most important thing in the room never made it onto the slide. Bad news travels upward differently than good news. Good news moves much faster. Bad news gets processed. People add context. They decide how to position it, who should deliver it, and when. And that's why the higher you rise, the more responsibility you have for the quality of truth that can reach you. And your door can be wide open while the truth stays completely outside that room. Because people aren't asking, can I tell the CEO? They're asking, what happened or what happens to me after I tell the CEO? And if you're consistently the last person to hear bad news, that's leadership data. If your executive team challenges each other aggressively, but become measured around you, that's leadership data. And if you discover what people really thought only after they resigned, that's some additional leadership data. So instead of asking, why didn't anyone tell me? Start asking yourself this question. What did people learn about telling me? And that question changes everything. Culture isn't what you say about honesty. Culture is what people predict will happen when they tell the truth. And here is where this gets very controversial. Sometimes leaders say they want the truth, when what they really want is truth delivered in a way that doesn't disturb them. Real truth doesn't always arrive polished. Sometimes it contradicts your strategy. Sometimes it exposes your decisions. Sometimes it makes you look wrong. And sometimes it arrives without a solution. If people have to make the truth comfortable before they're allowed to bring it to you, you're not leading a truth telling culture. You're leading a truth processing culture. And high performance leadership requires becoming increasingly difficult to protect from reality. It's safer to challenge, safer to correct, safer to disappoint. And perhaps hardest of all, safe enough for someone to say, the problem may be you. Because eventually the most powerful person in the organization can become the person with the least access to the unedited truth. And there's another moment in executive leadership almost nobody warns you about. You become important enough that people start performing around you. They know you influence compensation, promotions, opportunity, access, and careers. So naturally, their behavior changes. People become more prepared, they're more polished, they're more agreeable, they're more careful. And if you're not paying attention, you may interpret all of that as respect. Maybe it is, but maybe some of it's simply proximity to power. And here's an uncomfortable question. How much of the respect I experience belongs to me, and how much belongs to the chair that I'm sitting in? Because titles create an illusion that's almost impossible to detect while you're sitting in that chair. People return your calls faster, your opinions receive more attention, your calendar becomes more important. People want your advice, your access, and your introductions. And somewhere inside of all of that, it becomes difficult to distinguish genuine relationships from positional gravity. Power changes the feedback you receive about yourself. Your ideas receive more validation, your mistakes receive more grace, and your presence receives more recognition. And if you're not deeply grounded in who you are without that title, you can begin confusing the responses to your position with evidence about your person. And the title begins telling you who you are. Then disagreement can start feeling like disrespect. Challenge can feel like disloyalty. Stepping away can feel like disappearing. And suddenly the leader isn't protecting the mission, they're protecting the identity the mission gave them. And this is why the most grounded high performance leaders know who they are when nobody needs anything from them. The title becomes something they steward, not something they need. And here's one of the simplest tests of your leadership. Watch what happens when you leave the room. Does the energy expand? Does disagreement increase? Does someone finally say, okay, here's what I really think? Does the conversation become more honest, creative, alive? And if the room consistently becomes more truthful after you leave it, don't blame the room. Study your presence. And perhaps the most revealing question isn't what happens when I enter the room, it is what becomes possible after I leave the room. And the goal isn't becoming less powerful, it's becoming conscious enough that your authority doesn't require everyone else to become smaller. Because the highest expression of power isn't dominating the room, it's possessing enormous authority while leaving enough room for everyone else to fully exist in that room. And there comes a stage in leadership when you no longer need to demonstrate your authority because you become completely secure in it. You don't need the first word. You don't need the last word. You don't need your idea to win. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You can stop protecting your position and start protecting the quality of the conversation. And that's a very different kind of power. And some of the most powerful leaders I've encountered are almost invisible in the best meetings they lead. They're intensely present, but they don't consume the room. They ask the question and wait. They invite the person who hasn't spoken into the conversation. They ask for the argument against their own position. And when someone disagrees, they become curious. Because when you've spent decades being rewarded for having the answers, it takes tremendous discipline to stop being the answer. You stop proving how much you know and you start discovering how much the room knows without you. Imagine a consequential executive team meeting. You already have an opinion. Instead of giving it, you say, I have a perspective, but I'm going to hold it for now. I want to understand what everyone else sees before my position influences the conversation. That's not removing your authority. That's managing its impact. Then ask yourself a simple question. What are we not saying because I'm sitting here? And don't rescue the silence. Hold the tension. Let it work. Somewhere inside that silence may be the most valuable piece of information you haven't been receiving. And occasionally, even leave the room. Tell your executive team, discuss this without me. Come back and tell me what you believe. My friends, that's not surrendering leadership. It's discovering whether leadership exists without your presence. Because the goal isn't to become the center of every consequential decision. It's to create an organization capable of extraordinary decisions, whether you're in the room or not. That's scale, that's succession, that's leadership multiplication. There's one more question I think every CEO should be asking themselves. What do I do that makes it harder for you to lead? Then shut up and listen. Don't explain your intention. Don't correct their interpretation. And by all means, don't defend yourself. If someone has the courage to answer honestly, they're giving you access to a version of yourself your title may have prevented you from seeing, and that's a gift. The greatest executive leaders I've encountered don't make themselves smaller. They make their authority lighter. People can breathe around them, think around them, disagree around them, and most importantly, tell the truth around them. And ultimately, lead around them. And that's the transformation. Not becoming less powerful, becoming powerful enough that nobody else has to become less powerful because you're there. As we close today, imagine walking into your next consequential meeting. This time, don't only pay attention to what everyone else is doing, pay attention to what happens because you were there. Who becomes quieter? Who chooses their words more carefully? Who waits to hear what you think before deciding what they think? And most importantly, what isn't being said at all? We spend decades trying to earn influence. Then one day our opinion can change the direction of an entire organization. We spend decades trying to get into that room. Then one day we become the reason the room behaves differently. And that's the responsibility of executive leadership. Your presence has consequences. And once one sentence can redirect capital, alter someone's career, kill an idea, accelerate a strategy, or change what an organization believes actually matters. You may forget saying it tomorrow. They may remember it for years. So before your next meeting, don't ask, how am I going to lead this room? Ask, what happens to this room because I'm in it? Does your presence create courage or caution, truth or performance? Do people expand around you or become slightly smaller? Your title will enter many rooms before you do. You may never be able to change that, but you can decide what happens when you finally walk through the door. And perhaps that's one of the highest expressions of high performance leadership. Holding enormous authority without requiring someone else to feel smaller because you have it. Thank you for joining me today. And until next time, lead from your heart Live from your soul and remember that I love you, and the greatest leader you will ever become has been within you the entire time.